I concur with Senator Johans. We hear this, and it's not colored; it's unvarnished and independent. That's why we so value the Inspector General, and it shows the complexity of implementing the Affordable Care Act. But in order to implement the Affordable Care Act, you can't use the Appropriations Committee or sequester or other things to derail a policy that has now been passed into law, and that's what I'm concerned about. We have now passed the Affordable Care Act. We have voted 39 times to repeal it. And I would hope as we go through our regular order, we don't use the various appropriation subcommittees to go after the Affordable Care Act by proxy. So Mr. Miller has a big job, and also he's dealt a very complex hand, one of which is the certainty of his appropriations request through the president, and then also the impact of sequester on implementing not only that, but other laws. Now, I'm going to be clear on the request. As I understand it, the president has requested for the Treasury Department $14,177 million for the whole Department of Treasury. And within that, there's a request for IRS. And Mr. Miller, that request is for $12,861 million. Is that correct? And then, however, when we enacted fiscal 13, finally on March 27th, with incredible bipartisan support, we were able to pass the continuing funding resolution. That was at $11,793 million, I believe.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that correct? But you had a sequester hit of $594 million, and then because you're a big agency, another 2%. So don't we have across-the-board cuts of $618 million?
That sounds exactly.
And is that what you're living with?
620 sounds right.
$620 million coming out of IRS with its technological challenges. One, cybersecurity. The other, technological and modernization in order you to receive data and to do the job we asked you to do. Then you have personnel. And from what I gather, your personnel is a highly talented one because it requires people with business, accounting, and other pretty technical skills. Am I correct in that?
The vast majority of our folks are very professional in terms of knowing the tax law and dealing with different aspects of it, yes.
So it's not only, first of all, the person answering the phone has to know everything about everything because who knows what they get. And TurboTax is sometimes not as turbo as we'd like it. And then to the people who actually have to do all the back office work, what do you say and so how is the morale with sequester? So these are people very talented business sector, and I would bet they're highly desirable in the private sector.
I'm quite sure morale is not what any of us would like it to be as a federal employee generally, and as a IRS employee that's taking some time off, who will not be getting the promotional opportunities that they might have expected. But we have an incredibly highly dedicated workforce, and I'd like to think they're dedicated to public service. That's why they're there, as you might mention. So while morale is not what I would like it to be, we're a dedicated batch of folks, and we will get the job done.
Well, suppose you were given so-called flexibility, given where you were already cut below the 2008 level, cut below 2008. If you had flexibility, would that solve your problem?
I'm not quite sure what flexibilities we're talking about, whether it's the integrity cap or I'm not sure what we're speaking of, Madam Chairwoman.
Well, what I'm saying is this: there's the belief out here that giving management flexibility is a substitute for money. Is management flexibility a substitute for money?
I think management flexibility will help, but it will only go so far. We've trimmed so much in so many areas that I would think while being clever managers and efficient people will get us part of the way, it won't get us all the way.
Well, Mr. Miller, I want to get to a couple of other issues, but I do know your employees. I am so honored that IRS is headquartered in Maryland. And as I go around Prince George's County, in and out of Wegmans, I don't exactly join the dance party on Friday night, but I'm out there, or whether I'm at a worship service or some of the others in our community, I meet the IRS employees, and they are apprehensive. You know, they signed up for a government career, and they really want to learn that tax code, implement that tax code, go after the fraud, but make sure that if you filed a return and you deserve it, you get it, and you get it in a timely way. And if you call, you get it answered. And by the way, let's go after those crooks in prison that are even trying to concoct even more complicated schemes, or how to comply with the VA mandate, or how to apply with that. So I think this is not about you, sir. This is about us. And I think we need to really come to grips with this issue of ending sequester. And I know we want the banks to have certainty. I'm for that, and regulatory certainty. But you know what else I'm for? I'm for our federal employees having certainty, that if they work hard and they have a job with their government and they're doing job and meeting performance standards, they should get a pay. And where they're going after fraud or they're doing the job we should be shaking their hand and not handing them a pink slip. So I'm pretty firm about this. Now, let me go to standing up for the little guy. Small business, and a problem that I've come across in Maryland. I come from a family of small business, sir. My father was a small neighborhood grocer. My grandmother ran a great baker shop. And now when you would go to businesses like that, it could be the home improvement agency, the person who maybe is a florist, they often turn to what they call a payroll service provider in order to meet compliance. And they're not like a big business. So they give them the money to pay their taxes, and they think they're signing up for all rules and regs to be met and that their taxes would be paid. Well, we have a company whose name I will not mention because of ongoing investigations that just disappeared. And you know what disappeared? They disappeared, and the money that these businesses, like Duclaw Brewery and others, paid in, thinking that they had paid their taxes, also disappeared. What is now happening, sir, is IRS is coming to them wanting the taxes. So they feel that they're going to double pay, and then they're getting penalties and fees and so on. So let me tell you where I'm heading with this. Not to talk about this individual case. So I was pretty jazzed when I heard about this situation, that these really hardworking, profit-thin businesses, a lot of sweat equity for what they get. So here is my question. IRS has seen these types of problems before. There was one in Silver Spring and so on. Could you tell me what reforms that you would be making at IRS to deal with this type of fraud? I'm working on legislation, but I want to look at prevention and also make sure that these small businesses don't have to double pay. Could you tell me kind of how you see this problem and what you see to correct this problem?
So again, we won't be talking about specific cases because, of course, we can't. But in general, it's a horrible situation, right? You have people that don't necessarily know that they're being taken advantage of. And you do have the tax liability unpaid. So in these cases, and we need to get better at this, there's no question about it, We need to ensure that there's some way that people receive the notices we send out, because not receiving taxes, we will try to contact people. There are occasions when things happen that notice doesn't go to the right place, and we need to get better about that. We have...
And not better. It's got to be solved.
Yeah.
In other words, well, I'm going to be pretty firm about this. They didn't get these notices. They wrote a check to the company who was supposed to send the money to you. Now, that company didn't tell you or gave them the wrong address, so they never got a notice that they were delinquent. There was no flashing yellow light to them. So it's not we got to get better. It has to be pretty near perfect.
Again, we won't be talking about the individual case, but I will agree with you that that is a problem that we need to solve, and we'll work on that with you as well.
But what do you want to start working on it now, and what resources would you need? Is this a lack of, why hasn't this been dealt with? Is it a lack of resources, a lack that this wasn't big enough?
So part of this, Chairwoman Mikulski, hits a little too close to the individual case, and I'm more than willing to come up and talk to you about it. There are some of our
10 years
procedures
ago,
that
a Silver Spring company called First Pay stole millions of dollars. This has been, and your own taxpayer advocate has said this has come up at other times.
It has.
So if they've come up at other times, aren't there yellow flashing lights to have dealt with this sooner?
I think all the cases are a little different. And so I'm not quite sure. I'm not as familiar with that individual case, and I don't think I could speak to it in any event. But all the cases are a little bit different. It does happen. There are times when taxpayers are absolutely unknowingly involved, and there are times when they're more part of this than not. All these things are different. What I will tell you is we will, in these cases, work with the taxpayer to try to relieve as much stress and as much liability as we can. With respect to penalties, that is not difficult. With respect to interest, it's a little more difficult. Frankly, with respect to taxes, it's very difficult. So you have to sort of bucket these things in our discussion.
Right now, does the IRS notify taxpayers when a payroll service provider tries to change its client's business address?
Don't believe so, but let me come back to you on that.
Would you take a look at that and see if that would constitute a reform?
It's one of the areas that I agree with you we've got to do.
Does the IRS notify taxpayers when the payroll service is delinquent?
That one I do not know.
And multiple delinquents. Well, see, these go to systemic reform, not every case is different. I know every case is different, but then we would never have reform. There are patterns and practices. No. Number two, in the prosecution of these cases, do you ever seek, not only payment, but does it seek restitution?
I have to defer to the criminal side of this would be handled by the Department of Justice. I do believe there's some restitution aspects of it, but I'm not familiar enough. I have to come back to you on that.
Well, does investigation of these cases lie in IRS, or does it lie with Justice?
It's the IRS. The IRS will investigate, make a recommendation to the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice will prosecute.
I see. Mr. IG?
I don't disagree with most of what Mr. Miller stated. I would just elaborate on the following. We at TIGTA do have some responsibility investigating those types of incidents, especially when it involves third-party preparers. They play such an integral role in the overall system of tax administration. You're exactly right, Madam Chairwoman, that the IRS has to get a closer, control over impropriety committed by them. We have done work that has shown, one, that many IRS employees wear multiple hats. So sometimes they're answering phone calls for the average taxpayer about their tax return, and then these same individuals are sometimes assigned to individuals who have been victims of tax fraud. And that system needs a little more clarification, a little more clarity, both for the victim as well as for the Internal Revenue Service itself. there are just so many aspects of this overall issue that are troubling to us. That one, thank you for raising it. It's again not limited solely to tax preparers, such as the one you averred to earlier in your statement, Senator, but also again to individual taxpayers, and in terms of there is some complicity, as Mr. Miller alluded to. If people know that they're under investigation for alleged tax impropriety, they will immediately claim.
Right, but I got to stick to this point right now.
Yeah.
And I'd like to come back, Mr. Miller. What troubles me about your answer, sir, is that you're treating this as a cluster of individual cases rather than a nationwide problem. Now, so I think we're seeing this differently. I see this as a nationwide problem. I want to acknowledge that most of these payroll agencies are honest people, and small to medium-sized business must rely upon them in order to meet all rules and requirements that they could never learn working all by themselves. But do you see this as a nationwide problem, or do you see this as, well, each case is different?
No, it is a recurring problem. Whether it's a nationwide problem is a different question. I don't know that it recurs as frequently enough for me to consider it a nationwide problem. What we would agree with you absolutely on is that there are systemic ways to solve it.
Well, one, as we move forward, because I know my time is up, that I would really like you to take a look at this and truly identify over the last 5 years, how many complaints have you gotten like this? So you actually know what you got. And I invite the IG for any thoughts, analysis, and recommendations that he would have. And then, as we work on legislation that would go through the authorizing process, what recommendations for reform that you would have, and one of which is, when does the taxpayer have to pay? Again, so remember, if they can show that they have that they took every demonstrable step with every intent to meet their tax obligation, and you come back and want the same amount of money from them, when do they pay? I believe they should pay when the case has been concluded, not during the case. And it's another area of doing it. This whole address thing and notification and so on. I think notification's important. From what I understand from Mr. Miller, there are multiple ways and multiple different sources that could change addresses. So let's work on reform, but this is something that's been going on for 10 years. Acknowledging the good people, but I'm telling you, I've got a real problem. And it's not that I have a problem, but here we are as have people who really work hard.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And how we can help them.